For those of us who grew up with Masters of the Universe and are lifelong fans of He-Man and Skeletor, or those of us just getting into the brand or passing it along to a new generation, it's an easy brand to understand, no matter what time in life you discover it. You've basically got a barbarian versus a demon skull monster. And the battle between them tended to be the main storyline, the main driver of essentially the entire Masters of the Universe brand. When the show ended at the end of 1985, well, fans were left feeling like they wanted more. It wasn't really a satisfying ending. In fact, it really wasn't much of an ending. Now, of course, the property did get a second chance of life multiple times for new adventures, the 2000X series that Mike Young did, and most recently the Netflix show, Masters of the Universe Revelation, which actually boasted that it was going to present an ending, or at least a continuation, of He-Man's adventures in the Filmation series. Unfortunately, legally that was not possible, and yeah, there was a lot of pushback from fans about this, but the idea that Revelation was going to be the sequel, or at least tell an ending to Filmation, was not legally possible. So, how did He-Man and the Masters of the Universe end? For those of us who watched it in the 80s and grew up with the brand, it's one of those stories that, well, it just speaks to our childhood, it speaks to our sense of adventure. Lots of characters had amazing arcs in Filmation. The continuity was pretty tight, especially for an 80s show. Teela had a story, Prince Adam had a story, and heck, even Orko had a story. And while it's nothing to cry about, there really wasn't an ending that left fans feeling a sense of completion, satisfaction. Did we want Adam, He-Man, to scoop up Teela in his arms and head off into the sunset and get married, or whatever it is in Eternia is the equivalent of that? I don't know. I mean, they have holiday specials. Well, this was the closest we got to any kind of feeling like the show was coming to a conclusion. Whether He-Man was going to go off and retire, or Prince Adam was just going to give up being He-Man and keep his princely identity. Either way, the closest we really got to kind of any kind of conclusion, well, Teela's triumph gave us a little bit more of her backstory as the Sorcerer's daughter, and the problem with Power is looked at by most fans as the ending episode for Filmation, even though it wasn't the last. But both of these definitely left us wanting more. We didn't feel like we really got a wrap-up and a conclusion for these characters that we'd grown up with and become so beloved. Other different medium, like DC's comic book series over the last 5-10 years, have also pushed the brand forward and looked at kind of creating an ending, and it has followed along with the recent Masters of the Universe Classics toy line, making He-Man King of Eternia and Teela his queen. Now, they don't exactly get an afterlife, happily ever after, but at least the comics did kind of try to push things forward and tell a little bit more story. In the original toy line, the continuation was going to be He-Man going back in time to meet his ancestor, Hero, who in Classics became the bringer of the sword, as opposed to King Grayskull, who was the proper ancestor. But that line got canceled because, well, sales tanked in '87. When we did Classics, we didn't think we were going to be able to do this giant He-Man line. It really was just, hey, let's get out 6 figures. But it turned out that the fans really stepped up, and the line took off, and we started doing figure after figure, and suddenly this toy line that was just supposed to be the core characters with shared tooling became the largest Masters of the Universe toy line ever made, with over 300 characters, 2 playsets, multiple vehicles, beasts, monsters, dragons, robots, you name it. It even had a mighty Spector. No, just kidding. Sorry. Mindless self-promotion. All right. So, with the line doing so well, one of the gifts that we received was the ability to do mini-comics, which we couldn't do in the beginning. We didn't have any non-media. For the 30th anniversary in 2012, we were given a small stipend of non-media, which we used to do the first 3 issues. And then after that, we had just enough for 1 issue a year following that. So it was a slow rollout. But the mini-comics for Masters of the Universe Classic, which were packed in with usually the subscription figure for fans, or for subscribers of the line, was a vehicle we could use to basically tie up a lot of loose ends. So as an example, where we left He-Man in the 1980s was actually in outer space. He had taken off in Starship Eternia to go help save the galaxy from Skeletor and the mutant warriors. So the mini-comics were a great way of taking this and finding ways to essentially link the end of the Filmation era with the start of New Adventures, where after He-Man and She-Ra defeat Skeletor, well, actually Skeletor defeats them, the New Adventures ship shows up to take He-Man off on his amazing intergalactic adventure with beautiful women in scantily clad bird-themed outfits. Actually, it's very similar to his adventure on Eternia. I guess he just has a thing for bird girls. Anyway, the point being is that's where he was. We left him in the 1980s in outer space, fighting alongside characters that we knew, new characters that were introduced to us, and pretty much it ended with He-Man and Skeletor teaming up to go to Beastman's bar mitzvah. While we never made it to that actual event, the anticipation kept us all on the edge of the seat, hoping that that would finally conclude the entire epic of He-Man. Well, New Adventures didn't quite end that way. They never made it to the bar mitzvah. But as I said with the mini-comics, we used that to push the brand forward and connect the dots. So we actually were able to show He-Man returning from outer space with Icarius, aka Flipshot, in the starship Eternia, and bringing He-Man back home once the Horde Empire had been defeated. With a little help from Sky High navigating the, I guess you could say the flight deck, the flight tower, they were radioed in, and a squadron of Wind Raiders brought the ship back to Eternos Palace, and we were able to tell the homecoming story of He-Man that fans had been asking about for decades, wondering, well, what's going to happen after New Adventures? How does he get back to Eternia? And then what happens next? And that's what was so fantastic about the mini-comics, because we've got to tell that happy ending. So, essentially, He-Man arrives back on Eternia, and he's helped in the landing port by a royal staff member that's most definitely not Lubick. And you can see Sky High there shaking hands with Icarius without his helmet on. Then, of course, there's the reunion with his mother, Marlena, where Adam learns that while he was off fighting the Horde Empire and defeating evil, unfortunately his father had passed away. While a lot of people were upset over killing off Randor sort of off-screen, off-panel, it became a necessary plot point in order to, well, move He-Man forward. Because if Adam was going to become king, well, Randor had to be moved out of the way. So it made sense story-wise, and while unfortunately no one wanted to see King Randor go, for He-Man to be a king, that was the first step. The second step was he was going to need a queen. And now that he was back and his mother had informed him that he was now the ruler of Eternia, He-Man set up to basically rule and do what he could to bring peace to his planet. So this was the moment we waited decades to do, and I was so excited to write this, to see Axel draw it when I saw his pencils come back. It was just one of the coolest moments of being the Masters of the Universe brand manager, because we've waited for this moment for so long. He-Man back from New Adventures at the gate of Castle Grayskull, staring at his long-lost love, Teela, who had now become the sorceress of Castle Grayskull after her mother's passing. And this was told in the 2000X series, when we saw the sorceress be bitten by King Hiss and slowly be poisoned, which would make way for Teela. And so there we have He-Man and Teela finally reunited, the kiss that we've waited for, that we never got to see, finally. And, well, the moment was magical, and it really brought He-Man and Teela to the next phase of the storyline, and gave them a good, not a full ending, but it was satisfying to know that there was a payoff to all of this. Now, it wasn't just their marriage that He-Man got to return to, revealing that they'd been secretly married right before he left for the New Adventures. And there was another bonus to that marriage. Well, although He-Man was in outer space fighting for freedom, his son was raised by sorceress Teela as heir to the power of He-Man. Now, before you start, saying, oh, He-Man was a deadbeat dad off in outer space while his wife had to raise their son alone, not so much. Think of it much more as like an army general who's off at war and, can't be there. So it's not so much that he was ditching his family, it's that he was doing his duty, saving the galaxy. But now that he was back on Eternia, Adam embraced his role and used the name He-Man as his royal name, similar to how English monarchs often pick a royal name and don't use their real name. He was known as He-Man to the people. And of course, it was time to form a new, or shall we say, all new, all different Masters of the Universe, which of course came from the never-produced 1990 spin-off Hero Son of He-Man. And it wasn't long before Eternia was in trouble once again, and with He-Man retiring his power sword, it was now the time for a new hero to step up. So, the heir to the power of He-Man, Dare, his son, rushed into the Castle Grayskull library, pulls the original power sword out of a magical anvil, anvil, kind of like Sword in the Stone, and leaps into action, defending his father and the Masters of the Universe from the invaders. And Hero / Dare would step up. He saved the day and earned the right to carry He-Man's sword. Of course, He-Man now had his original power sword, or the one Man-at-Arms made for him to use. The storyline at this point is basically like passing the torch, very much like Batman Beyond, where He-Man becomes Dare's advisor, and Hero, or Dare, meaning He-Man Adam, Dare is Hero's real name, he starts to train, and with help from some magical allies, he works up to become the leader of a huge armada that has to defeat the greatest enemy Eternia will ever face, Gorpo, the Unnamed One, who attempts to steal the Star Seed, the power source of the whole planet. And the idea was that the brand would then continue with the son of He-Man, Dare, and the son of Skeletor, Skeletine, and no, I didn't make that up, that's from the 1990 story Bible as well. Skeletor's son was Skeletine, and there he is, fighting Hero. All of this was about getting our ducks in a row and moving the brand forward. So if you were into He-Man fighting Skeletor, which is fantastic, and that is the core element of the brand, there is plenty of content out there for you to enjoy this storyline. He-Man fights Skeletor in, 128 out of 130 episodes? Like, the Evil Seed episode, and maybe the Golden Discs of Knowledge. I have to remember, no, he fights Skeletor in that one. And yeah, same thing with 2000X. Pretty much almost every episode, He-Man versus Skeletor. I mean, unless He-Man's fighting the Snake Man or something. Now, of course, one way we could have tackled Masters of the Universe was to look at He-Man in the same way as a lot of superhero comics, where the stories just keep going into infinity. This wasn't really the plan of a lot of these creators back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, that the characters they were creating were just going to have countless adventures and never grow old. But it's a needed thing for a sort of corporately owned storyline and character, especially one nowadays that has to sell action figures and movies. We tended to look at it more like, Lord of the Rings, and we wanted to give the story a definitive start and ending, so that you felt like you had absorbed a story, that you actually had a conclusion and you were along for the ride. Of course, the story doesn't have to end. That's why Dare and Skeletine and all the other characters were set up to continue the brand. And there would be many, many other adventures and battles between different heroes, and He-Man would still be there as an advisor, just like Bruce Wayne in Batman Beyond. But he would no longer be the main hero because, he'd accomplished his goal. He defeated Skeletor, he defeated Hordak, he won that Twinkie eating contest, and now it was time to enjoy life. Now, the adventures we all have while playing obviously trump all of this, and there's no reason that this has to be the definitive ending, but the nice thing was we were able to give He-Man an ending, and that's not something you're really going to see in some of the other content. I mean, it's not like we went and blew up Castle Grail. Wait, we did do that. Okay, we did a lot of things. I hope you enjoyed this video, and it was some good insight into the ending of Masters of the Universe and how He-Man and Teela lived happily ever after. Although, not for too long.